Hi, what I want to talk to you about today is self-mentoring. And probably more specifically, we really need to get into setting the expectations. First of all, let's kind of talk about what is an expectation. An expectation is not a goal. And I think it's very easy to put those in the same basket, but they're really not. An expectation is something you're aspiring to achieve, something you want to change about yourself. And yes, that seems very common with a goal, but a goal is much more specific in the sense that it is a very detailed manner in which to achieve this very specific thing. We're looking at something a little more general, something that you want to accomplish. And a goal can be part of that, but it can be much broader than a goal. And it could be something about yourself, your performance. I can aspire to do great things. That's not necessarily a goal. So think of your expectation more as an aspiration, something you expect yourself to do, where a goal is something that you set to do. An expectation is something that you expect of yourself, not necessarily something that you would do. So let's look at some expectation examples. Um, these are ones that I've actually pulled out of the original goal sheets that you set. And so when we look at the expectations, we're going to say to develop a data management plan for IEPs, to communicate and collaborate with regular ed teachers effectively, to learn blended learning, learn how to collect and analyze data for decision making, to be compliant with EC paperwork, and to improve time management skills. So these are expectations that you're setting for yourself. And within several of these, they really do become goals then. But they are your expectations. So let's talk about the step-by-step guide to developing these expectations. There basically are 6 steps in this process. The first is obviously you're going to list your expectation. You're going to write it down. You're going to say it. We know what your expectation is for yourself. Then you're going to evaluate the present status. In other words, step 3 says acknowledge what is working, what's not working. So you have this situation. Something's obviously not working because you're wanting to change it a little bit. But what is working? And if you haven't been able to assess this, then you need to find some form of measurement to assess it, because how do you know what's working, what's not working? And then you look at identifying or developing a different or new strategy. And then you establish a timeline. You're going to implement this strategy. You need a specific amount of time in which you try it out to see if it works. So is it going to be 2 to 4 weeks? Is it going to be 4 to 6 weeks? Is it 2 months? How much time do you need to implement that strategy? And they're all going to vary. The last part is now you're going to review the process you're going to use to evaluate the strategy. You have to be able to measure it. You need to know if it worked or not. And there's a lot of different ways that you can use to determine that, and we'll talk about some of those later on. This is a sheet that I just developed because when I looked at the sheet that some of you were using, I think it was more goal-driven, and so what I want to do is move you back to more expectations. And I think that the fact that that it was more goal-driven might have been a little misleading. So let's take a look at driving our expectations. So on this sheet, you see the 6 steps. And again, you can write your plan in and kind of work through this. And I think that this particular document will give you a better course. So let's go back to step 1. What do you aspire to accomplish, to alter, to change about your present situation? What are you presently doing to meet this challenge? In other words, what do you have in place? And now step 3 is it working? Why isn't it? And how are you measuring it to determine if it's working or not? Step 4, what are you going to try to do to meet this challenge? What will you attempt? Is it going to be an activity, a strategy? Are you changing something within yourself? It could possibly be that in your public speaking, you say "and" too many times and you want to get rid of that. You have to develop a strategy that you would use, and then you could videotape it. But you have to come up with, what is this strategy that you're going to be analyzing? And how will you implement it? What timeline are you going to use to do that? And then step 6, how will you measure it over a set period of time? And you may measure it over a set period of time and get that measurement results, and then do a duplication or a replication of that to get more data, and then continue to use that data to determine what you're going to do. So let's look at some examples. When we go back to step one, here's an example that I actually took out of some of the sheets that had been provided to me. And it says, effectively communicate and collaborate with gen ed teachers in an effort to increase student achievement. Well, I'm going to go back and kind of cross some of this out, and let's just focus on communicate and collaborate with gen ed teachers. First of all, the word effectively, that's hard to measure. Unless you have gotten some kind of survey instrument off of a reliable source with reliability and validity, measuring effectiveness is really hard. And then you want to increase student achievement. I'm not understanding how you're going to be able to measure the effectiveness of communicating in collaboration in order to increase student achievement. I think the goal just really is, the expectation that you have for yourself is that you're going to communicate and collaborate with gen ed teachers. I think this entire statement is a goal. But let's go back to your expectation. And your assumption is then that if you're communicating and collaborating with the general ed teachers, that you're going to increase student achievement because those teachers are going to be more knowledgeable. But I don't know how you're going to have an effect on that. So I wanted to use this one in particular because it's a great goal. But as far as an expectation, you can see now what an expectation is in comparison to a goal. So what are you presently doing to meet this challenge? Because I really don't have that information, I have to assume that present effort is not working, that there's not collaboration or communication, or if there is, it's not effectively impacting what goes on in the classroom. So if we look at step 3, then the assumption is what was being done is not working. So apparently we got to find some new way to meet this challenge, a new strategy. And I thought this was great. They called it an email blast and updates. So in other words, they're going to set up, and this is their timeline, probably 10 to 15 minutes weekly. And I would suggest over a period of 1 month that they do this. And at the end of that month, at the end of 4 weeks after doing this repeatedly, that they either start looking at how they're going to measure it, which could be a survey to those teachers that just basically says, you know, did you feel more knowledgeable? What kind of insight did you gain? Did you feel that this helped you to become a better classroom teacher? Do you feel it would impact student achievement? I mean, at this point, we can only ask them to ascertain if these things we wanted from our expectation actually occurred. But you could also do an interview. You could sit down with them and just talk to them and make some notes. But regardless of however you do it, there has to be this measurement part. So let's look at some completed forms. I actually went into the forms that were provided to me, the goal sheets, and I kind of switched them over into an expectation sheet, this is what we would call this. It's self-mentoring guide, but it's an expectation sheet. And I put down this particular one, I will improve my case management skills, and the assumption I'm making is that their present data tracking system is not effective. I'm also assuming that it's not providing the data that's needed, or it's not meaningful. So now let's look at the new strategy. And they actually had like 4 sub-goals kind of listed. I actually highlighted this, and the strategy really is that you're finding a new data tracker for IEP goals that's more effective. Again, that term effective kind of bothers me, but I could say is more successful or is more appropriately conducive to what teachers want. I mean, but I left effective only because I felt that person, whoever wrote this, can work with that, tune it in however they want to, now that you get the general idea. But if you look at 1, 2, and 3, I actually took what they had listed as 4 strategies, and there's actually only 1 strategy. And some things that they're going to do, though, in order to meet this expectation, is they're going to talk to other EC teachers. They're going to have someone look at how they track the data, and they're going to create their own data tracking system if unable to find one. So this was all great. If you look at that strategy, it does very much relate to improving their case management skills. Now, if you go down to build the timeline, I looked at, they have a lot of things they're going to do there, but that finding a new data tracker, that's a pretty sizable expectation. So it would take 2 or 3 different devices in order to get there, 2 or 3 paths. So if you go to build the timeline, I also felt that they could talk to the EC teachers about, in order to ascertain what else is being used out there, they could talk to the other EC teachers. And they could have someone look at what they're doing to get some feedback, because that would be very effective as well. And I actually think that that kind of went back up to what are they presently doing and what works and what doesn't work under steps 2 and 3, because if you got feedback at that point, you would know what's wrong with your system, or you'd know if it was working. So this is kind of after the fact, but again, we're working within this document and I had limited information. So I just left it at timeline. I thought that it could work there. So they're going to select some different systems. Basically, what they're going to do is they're going to try different systems over a period of time. I suggested 2 to 4 weeks for trying a different system and collecting data on that. And the type of measurement they could use is they could review feedback from other people's observations of this new system. They could review feedback from reflection with others, and they could also consider the ratings of effectiveness from different systems that they've tried. In other words, you could do a Likert scale from 1 to 10, and then you could ask people to rate it. And of course, it would be nice if you'd had a rating of the old one, if in fact there was actually an old one, and maybe there wasn't. But I think then you could even try a different type of system. And maybe it's just so overwhelming that you can try a system this year and you would have to try a different system next year. And you could rate those systems. So this actually, I thought was a very, very interesting expectation about improving their case management skills, because I think this really is taking charge and being a leader. So I thought this was a great idea. But you can see some of the trickiness, and I think this will give you the general idea of what you need to be working toward. Here's another one I selected, and this one was incorporating blended learning into my classroom. And again, you see the assumptions. Since I really don't know if they're using it or not, I have to assume they're not. And I have to assume that the present process that they're learning is not working, and that's why they want to add blended learning, because I didn't really have any other data. So the strategy here really is they're going to incorporate it into their class. It's almost the same as the expectation. So some of the things that they're going to do is that they're going to maybe observe a blended classroom. They're going to attend online training. They're going to embark on a PLC. And then they're actually going to incorporate it into the class. Well, these other venues, 1, 2, and 3 there under step 4, are literally just steps you're taking to get kind of information about it, which you do need. But then the real key here is the strategy is that it's being incorporated. It's actually going into the classroom. So now when we go down to our timeline, I allotted 2 weeks to become familiar with blended learning, because obviously they obviously let me know that they didn't have that much knowledge of it and they needed to become more knowledgeable. So if you look steps 1, 2, and 3 under 4, somewhat those are duplicated in 5, because those are the first 2 weeks. You can use those particular steps in order to become familiar with blended learning. And then the next 2 weeks actually incorporated in the class. And this is really where self-mentoring begins. I mean, it is a 2-step process for this person. I thought they did a great job. There's the first step is getting the information and become knowledgeable. And then the second part, which is the most interesting part, is now they're going to incorporate it. And now they have to figure out how they're going to gather data on incorporating it, because they're really, in observing a classroom or attending the training or the PLC, those 3 venues are nothing more than for them to become knowledgeable. And the only way we can evaluate if those worked is if, when it is incorporated into the class, is if it's successfully incorporated into the class. So what we're going to do, and the real focus of this is going to be that incorporating it into the class. So now they're going to begin gathering data on a new timeline. I suggested 2 weeks. Maybe they need 4 weeks. Again, I'm not an expert in all of the things you're trying to do. So you're the leader. You have to decide your timeline. But during that time, then, that's when they could do reflection and have those logs. They could do surveys. They could videotape themselves, have someone else watch it themselves. You also, depending on what you're trying to do, can actually videotape yourself and watch it without sound. You'd be amazed how you learn so much about your body patterns. You could have another teacher observe. These are all things that you could use. And then under step 6, then I put those items that I suggested, the student survey or survey other individuals who might have knowledge and get feedback. So you can see how that kind of falls into place. The last one here we're going to look at this one was a very, very long expectation, or more like a goal, but it said to develop more effective classroom management techniques and strategies specific to the needs of the classroom special ed or special needs population. So the assumption is that the classroom management techniques and strategies are not presently effective, and they're not working. So then we go to step 4. The strategy here looks as if it is to identify 1 or 2 new techniques or strategies that are effective with special needs population. Now, they talked about a toolkit, developing a toolkit, and that's really kind of a goal. It's not necessarily an expectation. I mean, the expectation is that you're going to be more effective in the classroom, or you're going to be more successful in the classroom because you're going to have these additional techniques and strategies. So what we have to do is actually identify the strategies that would help you reach that goal, which is under your expectation, and that is you're going to become better. So they identified doing internet searches and observing in other classrooms, and identifying and attending workshops and trainings that will provide strategies. So I think they just need to pick 1 or 2 techniques or strategies, because I don't know how you would separate and evaluate a multitude of them. But if that's possible, then do it. I saw it somewhat just overwhelming in management itself, which is kind of a part of this. But so if we go back to 1 or 2 strategies, and what you could actually do is, say you have 4 or 5 strategies, so you try one strategy for 2 weeks, you use the next 2 weeks for another strategy, and if you're really, really go, then you do another strategy for another 2 weeks, and for 2 or 3 months, you could actually every couple of weeks rotate into a new strategy, however you want to do that. But step 6 then is have other teachers observe and provide feedback about the effectiveness over those 4 weeks. You could survey students, videotape your class and observe the video, or have another teacher observe the video to gather feedback. But you got to figure out how you're going to measure if those strategies worked. I mean, you're wanting to, your ultimate goal, I guess, an initial goal was that you want this toolkit. So your expectation is you're going to fill it. So then you have to design a plan in order to do that. So in this particular case, you could continue with this throughout years until after a year or 2, you would have this phenomenal toolkit, because you would have data to support what worked and didn't work. The only thing that's very nebulous in teaching is that it's always possible that because your students change, that what works with one group of students may not work with another. So it's very hard to have a very tangible, solid toolkit, but you certainly could have some really great strategies and some backup strategies I think that would be effective. So I thought that was a great goal. Let's talk a little more about measurement, because this is always the area that is most difficult, I think, to relate it. And that is, you can use SurveyMonkey, which is a great technique, and you can survey adults or students or other people, faculty, whatever you need to, community, whatever you need to gather information. You can do a Likert scale. This is very popular. Usually you use even numbers, but you just do a number range. You have a statement, and then you put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7, 8, 9, 10, or 11, 12. And you ask them to, from effective to ineffective, or from knowledgeable to not knowledgeable, whatever it is you're rating, you ask them to respond by circling one of the numbers. And that gives you great information, because then you can compare from the beginning to the end to see if you've seen improvement. You can do reflection notes, and then you can read over those notes and pull qualitative data from that. You can do written feedback. Again, this is another source of qualitative data. You can do questionnaires. That gives you sometimes qualitative and quantitative data. And then you can just use hardcore quantitative data, which is just numbers. It's number crunching. It's, you've got this information, this amount, such as an example that would be if you were doing videos and you counted the number of times that students raised their hands and you didn't respond, because this is something you were looking for in yourself. So therefore you have They raised their hand 17 times on day 1, 16 times on day 3, 12 times on day 7, and you're able to show almost in a graph that you have improved, that you are doing better at observing what's going on in your classroom. So that's an example of quantitative data. So I think that kind of gives you the general idea. So remember, there are 6 simple steps in the process. It's not really difficult, but you do kind of have to, kind of go down through the process. Don't ask me why it works. It just seems to work effectively. And again, it comes out to leader. Each of those 6 steps does build a leader. So thank you so much for being with us today and being a part of the presentation.